Hi everyone. So we're really excited that we have another guest speaker. I have Graeme Moffat here from Interaxon, which, if you didn't know, is the company that makes that awesome headband that we've been using to collect EEG in the next room. Yes, if you have not decided to look at some dogs and cats, you should, because it's cool. We will also be playing with Muse at our hack night tonight at 7 p.m. Another plug. And I will let him take over because he knows.
Are you guys doing like some sort of oddball task in the other room?
Are we?
Oh,
Faces and houses too.
Faces
really?
and houses.
Okay, so that's great because I have that data slide in this talk.
Ooh.
So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to BrainHack. This is a weird one. This is the only talk I've ever given where I reached out to the organizers and said, I really want to talk to this group. Can you invite me? Yeah, and I think the reason why is that I'm really strongly motivated to get this message out about new opportunities for neuroscientists to work outside of academia and hospitals, which is kind of a new thing with a few exceptions historically. And the reason for that is that there's been this explosion of interest in neurotechnology in the private sector and a demand for specific kinds of neuroscience skills. So my background is I used to work at Frontiers in Neuroscience. I ran Frontiers in Neuroscience for 4 years. We got acquired by the Nature Publishing Group. I started to see a little bit more of the world, and I started to meet all these interesting people doing neurotech in the private sector and left publishing to go and work in the private sector, become a neuroscientist again. So let's see if I can pull this up. So you guys are aware of what's going on out there. You see these headlines. There are real neurotech applications. People are doing neuroscience on large groups of people. They're opening private labs to do research. They're trying to commercialize technology in really interesting and provocative ways, some of which will definitely not work and some of which might work. So you can see, Elon Musk has put a lot of money into Neuralink. Ryan Johnson has put a bunch of money into Kernel. $100 million. Facebook has their research program at Building 8 where they're trying to do fast optical coherence tomography on Broca's area to try and read and the auditory cortex to try and figure out if they can get a BCI working that reads language from Broca's area directly. And it's getting a lot of attention. So neurotechnology now is sort of in the public sphere and in the public domain, and people are talking about it. Suddenly, it's popular to be a neuroscientist. People are interested in what we say. This has been coming for a while. So a lot of people have been working on neurotech in the background. Some of you probably in this room, outside of the academy and at hackathons. We got our start at Interaxon. We're based here in Toronto. I think it's safe to say we're now the largest EEG manufacturer in the world. We sell the most popular EEG system in the world. That's the advantage of selling an EEG system for $250 that's easy to put on and giving people a reason to put it on their heads so that they can learn a skill, is that you sell a lot of EEG systems. And a side benefit of that is you can produce EEG systems at very low cost. So this actually came out of Steve Mann's lab at the University of Toronto. This is iTap, which was one of Steve Mann's original augmented reality interfaces. This is our CTO, Chris Amony, who is wearing a version of this. It's like a version of Google Glass back in 2001. And Chris actually had to wear a backpack with a computer in it to get a 640 by 480 display in that iBox. The reason Interaxon got started into brain-computer interfaces was Chris was trying to create a way to control that interface with EEG. So he wanted to be able to get like 2 or 3 degrees of freedom to be able to move a mouse cursor or make selections with thought. It didn't work. But what did work was he realized in the process of making this thing that in order to push a signal around, an EEG signal around, he had to learn how to think in ways that would make the signal change. So he accidentally taught himself mindfulness meditation in the process of learning to push EEG signals around, and realized this and started to ask people the question, has anybody ever heard of this phenomenon? I feel like I can control my thoughts now. I can choose whether to attend to something or not to attend to something in a really, almost a detached way. And somebody said, yeah, that's meditation. That's what you learn. So it turned out that the company had accidentally built a mindfulness tool and not an interactive BCI for augmented reality, which was fine because that's a useful thing to do. So if you look at the history of EEG, this is just one example. You guys are working on all kinds of other examples. This is sort of 90 years of EEG, going all the way back to the stuff that not long after Berger, when it was invented. This is all from where I did my PhD in Marseille, where they keep all this stuff in the lab, to Muse and now building EEG directly into things like sunglasses and headphones. And you can take this kind of consumer EEG and you can do kind of neat things. Apparently, you guys are running these tasks in the other room, the face house task. So this is, I think this is 3 or 4 subjects that we ran last summer on this task when we first developed it, and we're running it on Muse LSL. This is so we thought we saw an N170, which was really cool. An N170 is a face potential. It's a face response potential. If you show somebody things that look like eyes, you tell them they're eyes, there's some sort of top-down and bottom-up interaction that produces this face potential, N170, right at 170 milliseconds, give or take, this peak. It's not the same orientation as it would be in a system that's referenced differently, but it's definitely there. It's bigger for faces than houses. And one thing that didn't occur to us until we put this out on social media was that there's probably an N250 somewhere in here that an N250 is a recognized face. So this is a face you're familiar with. So Alison Sekuler at Baycrest said, hey, that looks like an N250. Let's try that experiment too. This is sort of the advantage of open science and getting all your results out of there. Where we're headed next, Interaxon. And I'm just going to go over this very briefly before I get into the generalized careers in neurotechnology. This is the kind of thing we think we can do now. So we now have 4 or 5 neuroscientists on staff, and we are building EEG and ERPs directly into virtual reality headsets. The idea here is to make neuroadaptive gaming so that you can measure responses to things. You have complete control of the stimulus environment in virtual reality. So you know exactly what people are seeing and when they're seeing it. And you can measure those responses, and you can start to do machine learning on very large data sets of EEG without necessarily having to disambiguate and do post-hoc analysis. You can start to do stuff in real time. So these are all the kinds of skills we hire for. Another kind of skill that seems to be, you guys are developing here that is not widely available yet is very large-scale data sets. So this is a thing we published Ali Hashemi published in eNeuro last year on 6,000 of our users and their EEG alpha peak frequency. There were no tools to analyze this kind of thing. Like nobody's ever built an analysis pipeline for 100,000 EEG data set, or a 100,000 EEG session data set. And these are the kinds of tools that are really becoming. Finally, there's an application for very large-scale neurodata tools in the private sector to develop these not only interesting experiments, but potentially biomarkers of brain health. Okay, so we're just one example of a lot of new kinds of companies, new and old, where neuroscientists can really find jobs as neuroscientists in the private sector. So this is the kind of new thing. If, when I was doing my PhD, it was like, well, you could go into academia, or you can maybe go work for Medtronic if you're lucky and you want to do that. And that's about it. And the more I talk to people who, from sort of my generation, I finished my PhD in 2010, the more it's like, man, like there's real jobs out there for people who know the stuff that we know. I talked to Alex Barachant, who developed the Muse LSL interface and a bunch of other EEG things. He got hired by Control Labs. I tried to hire him for Interaxon. He's an EEG specialist, machine learning. He had 5 offers from private sector companies as a guy who knows about EEG, which is pretty remarkable that happens now. That was never a thing even 3 years ago. There are lots and lots of interesting companies you can work in out there. So in addition to the sort of traditional imaging and diagnostic stuff like Philips, Siemens, GE, and the EEG research stuff, and all of these private sector things like Kernel and Neuralink and Nexion, there are companies like Cognito Therapeutics, Ed Boyden's company, that does sensory stimulation. They're trying to take this 40 hertz stimulation paradigm that they developed at MIT and bring it to market as a stimulus therapeutic to alleviate risk of dementia. There are cool companies like Akili Interactive and Pear Therapeutics, which are not necessarily neurotech companies, but they certainly have a lot of neuroscientists in them. Akili just got a video game for ADHD designed around behavior change through second phase FDA approval. So they're going to market with this. They've got a lot of money. They're going to change the entire game for ADHD treatment. They're going straight up against like Vyvanse and methylphenidate, and they have comparable efficacy. Pear Therapeutics is another great one. They've just gotten an app through second phase FDA approval for online CBT for addiction. And they've got a ton of psychologists and experimental psychologists and neuroscientists on staff. And these people, ultimately the management class of these companies comes from the R&D and product sides, because they're product-driven companies, and they have to do clinical trials, they have to do clinical validation, and those are the most important risk points. So they need scientists right in the top level in the C-suite, they call it. And finally, there are all of the consumer neurotech companies like Control Labs, like Think, Halo, OpenBCI, MellowMind, software-oriented ones like Neurable, which is a great company in Boston that's doing signal processing and machine learning on EEG for VR. So they're just building the software experiences. They're working with game developers to build these things. Peer is one that came out of a collaboration that we did with UVic, where they developed a diagnostic test based on evoked potentials. They spun it out as a company, and now it's software that runs on Muse and other things, MindLift and others. Okay, say you want to stay in Canada. So I'm apologizing to the people who are in the other BrainHacks who are not in Canada. This is going to be somewhat Canadian focused because we're in Toronto. But just to give you some examples, so some of you have probably heard of Synaptive. You heard of Synaptive? Has anybody not heard of Synaptive? Okay, so Synaptive is here in Toronto. They do neurosurgery operating suites technology. They're making their own MRIs at 555 Richmond Street. They're winding the coils themselves. They're making half Tesla, highly uniform field imaging systems that are going to completely change how MRI is deployed in hospitals, especially in real-time and perioperative use of MRI. They're creating new applications. Perimeter Medical does high-throughput imaging. Canavi Medical does the same thing. Huron Technologies does digital pathology in Waterloo. They've just hired another 100 people and moved into a new building. Figure One does something very similar. We do, Interaxon does some pretty cool stuff. We just hired another neuroscientist who started this week. Dano is here from Avertis. They do some really cool stuff on therapeutic application of EEG for epilepsy. Mindset in Montreal does EEG-based headphones for relaxation and focus in offices. So they do a noise-canceling headphone with EEG built into them. And there are other companies in health that draw very heavily on the research that happens here in the Toronto area, including Winterlight Labs, Pocket Health, Cloud DX, and a lot more. And of course, if you are good at machine learning and data science, there's AI. So you can go and work in AI, and I'll give you a little bit more information on pathways into AI work. Some of you probably know this stuff if you're going to the machine learning meetups, but just some of examples of the companies that are scaling very fast in Toronto are Integrate AI, Toronto and Montreal, Integrate AI, Layer 6, Element AI, and there are a bunch of other ones. Okay, so say you decide that maybe the private sector is for you. How do you sell yourself? Why would a private sector company want a neuroscientist like you? Well, the first reason is that you bring credibility to the company. If you're a qualified neuroscientist with educational credentials or achievements or publications, you're lending your credibility to a company. So you want to choose carefully, but you also want to not undervalue yourself and what you can bring to a company, especially a small startup. You're bringing rigor. So you know how to do hard, detailed work. You know how to run the experiments. You know how to write them up. You know how to do the statistical analyses rigorously. You're bringing in, if you're coming straight out of a postdoc or grad school, you're bringing up-to-date knowledge that maybe doesn't exist in the company, and you're going to have new insights on the problems that they're applying. You know how to communicate, hopefully, by the end of, if you're in grad school, hopefully you figured out a little bit about communication and how to report on things. And finally, not finally, but you can quickly analyze. You're seeing a lot of papers. You probably all have your Google Scholar alerts, so lots of stuff is coming through your inbox. You're up to date, and you know how to read, pick the most relevant stuff, synthesize it, and explain it to somebody. That's a very, very valuable skill, and it's hard to find people who can do that well in the private sector. That's true across the board, not just neurotech. You can manage projects and you can do independent work, so don't sell yourself short. The thing that too many scientists do when they move into the private sector is they sell themselves short. You're coming in with a lot of skills that you may not value as highly as the company will value in you. If you're working in things like neurotechnology or even any kind of mobile app or online service, you know how to measure human behavior, or at least you know something about it. This is kind of user experience research and testing, which is a whole other field that's just blowing up in Toronto right now. And you might even know something about machine learning, deep learning, and AI. You can code, you can analyze, and you have specialist insights from your discipline, from whatever you did your grad work on, from whatever you did your your scientific projects on. How can you convince a company to hire you if you decide you want to pursue this? This is where you get, where you have a real advantage coming out of a science degree. So MyTax is a government funding organization that helps scientists try stints in the private sector, grad students, postdocs. They will cover up to 40% of your salary for a year, or up to 2 years in some cases, in 4-month trimesters of the year. And so you can, it's a very low risk way for you to try this out and for the company to try you out. OCE, Ontario Centres of Excellence, does something very similar through the Talent Edge program for master's students, for grad student, or for PhD students, for postdocs. NSERC Engage does something similar. So NSERC Engage is a very low risk way for your lab that you might be working in now to do a project with a company that is trying to solve a problem. The success rate on that grant, those grants, I talked to the NSERC guy for Ontario, is 87%. So if you find a company that has a project that they want to do and you want to do with them and you can get them to agree to it, it's almost a guarantee that the $25,000 flows to your lab, to your PI, to do that project. And then you get to know what the company does. You get to work on a problem for the company, and it's no risk to them. So, so we have a fire alarm. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll just continue. Yeah. And finally, shred. So this is sort of an esoteric tax thing, but it's really important to know if you're a scientist or if you're managing scientists. Something called strategic research and development, something or other. This is what companies use to get tax reimbursements for high-risk R&D. If a project is...
So it is the fire alarm, but they'll announce if they want us to leave.
Okay. So we'll just keep going. So if a company is undertaking, and this is once you're in the company, if a company is undertaking high-risk R&D in Canada and the project has a likelihood of failure, then 60 to 80% of those R&D costs are reimbursable to the company through. For those of you online, we have a fire alarm here. We'll update you momentarily.
Fire alarm has sounded. E1 level of the West Tower. Cause of the alarm is being investigated. Toronto Fire Services has been notified. Stand by for further instructions.
Okay. And off we go. Yeah, so shred. For engineers and scientists who are working 100% of their time on high-risk projects, we get, as a company, and all the companies who do this get, 60, 70% of their salaries back in reimbursements through the CRA. It takes a year and a half to get them from the time that you spend the money, but that money comes back. So that's a very effective way of de-risking research. What it means essentially is that to hire a scientist in your company costs much less than to hire a salesperson or an operations person or somebody else per capita, which means that you can ask for a slightly higher salary, right? You can boost yourself up. What kind of skills? Well, learning to code is a really good one if you want to move into private sector neuroscience or neurotech. Basic management tools, which I'll go over a little bit, and you can do a skills boot camp. And this one gives you much broader based skills to allow you to move just about anywhere as a data scientist. If you have a GitHub repo, then show it off. Still updating the fire alarm.
Cause of the alarm is being investigated. Toronto Fire Services has been notified. Stand by for further instructions.
I thought these new buildings were supposed to be fireproof. So publish your GitHub repo and share it with people you want to convince to hire you. Put it in your resume. Send it out there. show off if you're working on something that a company is interested in, if you've developed software. Dano from Avertis developed software that works on Muse, and we are taking it out to universities all over the place and helping convince them to use it to teach their students EEG. Dano, it's going into an SFN abstract before 5 p.m. today. Yeah, so don't be afraid to bug people. If you really want a job, you really want to work at a company, just find the head of R&D, find somebody there who's amenable to talking to you, take them out for lunch, and even if they don't have a job there, send them an email every 6 months saying, hey, I really want to work for you. Yeah, maybe every 2 months, I don't know. But like until you get it. Like I've hired people who have just sent me their resume every few months until a job opened up and I was like, that person, they want to work here.
Cybersecurity. Fire alarm has sounded. E1 level of the West Tower.
Yeah. So like, don't be afraid. Don't be self-conscious about chasing the jobs that you want. The worst thing that'll happen is somebody will think, man, this person's really determined and really wants to work here. So it's not a discouraging thing. Nobody's going to get pissed off at you, and if they do, you don't want to work there. And then.
Possibly alarm is being investigated. Toronto Fire Services has been notified. Stand by for further instructions.
We're standing by for further instructions on the fire alarm. All right. You can often you'll find job descriptions if you're moving into the private sector that don't fit exactly what you think your skills are or what you want to do. That's okay if you can get in and you can grow the role into something that your skills are more suitable for, what you want. One of the things that you find when you move into the private sector is that your job changes much faster than it does in the academy. So companies move faster, jobs change faster, responsibilities change. You might end up becoming a manager before you expect to. A lot of people in our company do. So how do you learn the business knowledge that allows you to generalize and succeed outside of the academy and in private sector science and beyond? Well, there are usually business courses and institutes or business courses and programs at whatever school you're at. And if there aren't, or if you can't find one for scientists, then just sneak into the executive MBA courses. You'll meet people there who will potentially hire you. You'll meet business people in the executive and the MBA courses. The executive MBA ones are a little bit better because it's like more senior people who are sort of backfilling their competencies as senior managers and executives. You can learn business shorthand. There are podcasts on this. It's easy to do. Find mentors. So find people who can help you. Take them out for lunch every so often. Ask them for help. Ask them for advice. Everybody who succeeds in business is going to have a mentor or many. These are sort of your best friends. You can bounce ideas off them. You can ask them questions about how to do things, and finally learn some management skills. This is actually where sort of things diverge often. Some people really like management, where you generalize away from the R&D, the engineering tasks, the technical tasks, into managing people, and your competencies in coding and math and science sort of atrophy a little bit. You get a little behind, but you're really good at organizing people, and so you have people who work with you who have those competencies. The 3 books that I recommend, the best ones that I like, are The Personal MBA, High Output Management, and The Effective Manager. These are really, really good books. They're short, they're easy reads. Mine are all very dog-eared because I've read them so many times. Say you want to go a little bit away from neurotech, neuroscience, but you want to apply your quantitative skills. Well, there are lots of jobs out there, as I'm sure you know, for data science, AI, and ML. And this is something that quantitative neuroscientists, the kind of people who go to hackathons, are particularly well suited to. So if you have skills in coding and analytical thinking, and you're good at experimentation and data cleaning, which is data engineering, which you're good at almost by default if you've done any science, then this is a potential career path. The basics to get started are Python machine learning tools. Scikit-learn is the industry standard. It was developed by Gael Verico, who's a neuroscientist. Jupyter Notebook was developed by Fernando Perez, who's a neuroscientist. These tools for neuroscience are now some of the defaults for machine learning, data science, AI. MySQL and R are really handy things to know as well. But you can pick them up. They're not as hard as learning some other stuff. And finally, Insight Data Science Fellowships. So this is some really good news that we got last week here in Toronto. These things are all over the US. The Insight Data Science Fellows program, they also have an AI Fellows program, but the one that's most suitable kind of for people coming out of a postdoc or a PhD is the Data Science Fellows program. It's a 7-week intensive postdoctoral training program that takes your skills as a quantitative scientist and teaches you how to apply them to ML and data science problems in practice. And you get interviews. Everybody who gets into this gets interviews, and everybody gets a job, pretty much. I think their hiring rate is 100%. So these are high-paying, highly skilled jobs in data science and AI. Insight is launching in Toronto in September, and the deadline for application for the September cohort is May 7th. So insightdatascience.com. Go check it out. Read the white paper. It's a pretty cool program. I've known a lot of people who've gone through it, working at Facebook and AWS and Amazon, and making all kinds of money and doing really interesting work. And it's a great way to bootstrap if you are a highly skilled scientist with, who sort of, advanced in your career to the point where you're at PhD or beyond. The Toronto Machine Learning Summit, if you're interested in that kind of work, is on May 16th. I think they have student rates and postdoc rates. That's a great one to go to as well. How should you think about a career trajectory in the private sector as compared to academic or other kinds of science? So the first thing to remember is this is not academia, the private sector. You don't have to pay your dues. You just have to show what you can do and get stuff done. So advancement can happen much faster than it can in the academy. There are lots of ways to go through your career in different interesting paths. You will change companies likely more than once. So the average lifetime of a tech worker in Silicon Valley, Toronto, Boston, all of the major US and Canadian cities is about 2 years. Executives last 4.5 years at a company before they move on. This doesn't mean people are getting fired. It means that they're finding better jobs for more money or more rewarding jobs, and they're moving on to those. That's typically what happens. If you want to be a specialist knowledge in neurotech or machine learning or AI, an individual contributor, you can make yourself indispensable. You can become an indispensable resource to a company. You can keep your skills really, really sharp for your entire career. If you want to become a manager, then you'll generalize your skills, and you'll probably advance through the ranks. And then you'll have a bunch of skills that will allow you to move to companies that are, work on totally unrelated problems to the last one. And your skills are generalized enough that you can organize people, solve problems, get things done in a variety of different fields. Good ideas and talent go far, but communication skills are critical. So you have to learn to tell people what you're doing on a more regular basis than you did in grad school and postdoc, where you're succeeding, where you're struggling, and you want to send updates to people on a regular basis. The other thing that I learned, and it's a hard thing to learn, is you're not selling your ideas on their merit alone when you're working in an organization, in a business. You have to get your ideas out to other people at your level and other people around the organization and say, hey, what do you think of this? Do you think this is a good idea? I want to pitch this in the management meeting next week, or I want to do this. And they say, yeah, I'd change this, that, and the other thing. You get a bunch of people on your side before you have the meeting where you pitch the idea. So it's not like a lab meeting where you throw an idea out there and you debate. It's like you're trying to get people on side and you're trying to get something moved forward with the support of as many people as you possibly can in an organization. That's how business works. Finally, the thing to remember, one of the more important things to remember if you're moving into the private sector is, so I've mentioned the reasons why I think you have a lot of skills that you might not value as highly as your eventual employers will if you move into the private sector, but you are a scientist and you can figure this out. You're really good at problem solving, so you can figure out business. It's kind of just a game. It has different rules, but they're rules nonetheless, and they're flexible. And so you can figure it out and you can succeed in the private sector if you want to. I'm happy to answer questions. I think we'll just go offline now, but I'll stick around if anybody has questions. You can feel free to email me. My email, I'll put it up. It's moffat@interaxon.ca, M-O-F-F-A-T. Or you can find me on Twitter. Just shoot me a question. I'm happy to answer them. I'm pretty passionate about this because this is like neurotechnology, and neuroscientists moving into the private sector with their neuroscience skills is a new thing that didn't exist when I was in grad school, and we were like, a number of us were like, man, wouldn't it be so cool if we could, work in the private sector as neuroscientists? And now you can. So I think it's really important to get the word out that you guys understand that there are options that you may not have considered in the past, and I hope that you do, and I am happy to help if I can. Thanks.